A man walks into a cafe and sees his ex-wife working. With a baby that looks just like him, he got shocked and freeze. Watch the full story to know more. Before we dive in, we'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button to support the channel. Now, sit back, relax, and let the story begin. The gentle autumn breeze rustled through the streets of Portland, sending crimson and gold leaves dancing across the sidewalk. He was running late for a meeting with a potential client, something that rarely happened to the normally meticulous business consultant. At 35, Luke had built a reputation for precision and reliability that had earned him an impressive roster of clients and the corner office at Meridian Consulting. Today, however, Luke's normally composed demeanor was slightly frazzled as he realized his regular coffee shop was closed for renovations. With 20 minutes before his meeting and a desperate need for caffeine to shake off the remnants of his late night preparing slides, Luke spotted a cozy-looking cafe across the street, the Morning Brew, its warm yellow lights inviting against the gray October sky. Without hesitation, he jaywalked through a break in traffic and pushed open the door, the welcoming scent of freshly ground coffee beans and baked goods immediately enveloping him. The cafe was busy but not crowded, with a gentle hum of conversation creating that perfect background noise that Luke often sought when working outside his office. He joined the short line at the counter, absently scrolling through emails on his phone while mentally rehearsing key points for his upcoming presentation. It wasn't until he was second in line that Luke glanced up at the menu board, and as his gaze lowered to the barista serving customers, the familiar profile caused his heart to stutter painfully in his chest. There, wearing a green apron and a small name tag that read Sarah, was his ex-wife. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of the elaborate styles she'd favored during their marriage, and there were new freckles scattered across her nose. Evidence of time spent in the sun that he hadn't witnessed. Luke froze, his lungs suddenly forgetting how to draw breath as his mind raced through options. Leave immediately, pretend he hadn't seen her, or face this unexpected collision of past and present head-on. Before he could decide, Sarah turned, slightly to grab a to-go cup, and her profile view confirmed what his stunned brain was struggling to process. It was definitely her, the same heart-shaped face, the same slight dimple in her left cheek when she smiled at the customer she was serving. Luke was so fixated on the shocking sight of his ex-wife, who had been a marketing executive when they were married, serving coffee, that he almost missed the even more astonishing detail in the corner of the cafe. A playpen had been set up in what appeared to be a small family corner, where a toddler of perhaps 18 months stood clutching the edge, babbling happily, while an older woman, presumably another cafe employee, kept a watchful eye on him while wiping down nearby tables. The child had a shock of dark hair that stood up slightly in the front, exactly the way Luke's did when he was overdue for a haircut. But it was when the toddler turned, letting out a delighted giggle at something the older woman said, that Luke felt the floor shift beneath his feet. The boy had Luke's eyes, not just the unusual shade of green that Luke had inherited from his own father, but the same slight almond shape, the same long lashes that had been the source of good-natured teasing throughout his childhood. It was like looking at his own baby photos, which his mother still kept prominently displayed in her living room despite Luke's half-hearted protests whenever he visited. The realization crashed through him like a physical blow, leaving him lightheaded and unsteady. This child, this beautiful, happy little boy, looked exactly like him, and he was here, in the same cafe where his ex-wife apparently now worked. "Sir?" "Excuse me, sir." The voice of the customer behind him broke through Luke's stunned trance, the lines moving forward. Luke mumbled an apology and stepped forward, suddenly finding himself directly in front of Sarah, who was looking down at the register as she greeted him with the clearly rehearsed, "Welcome to the Morning Brew. What can I get you today?" When she looked up, the transformation was immediate and jarring. Her professional smile froze, then collapsed entirely as the color drained from her face. The pen she'd been holding clattered to the counter as her hand went limp with shock. For an excruciating moment, they simply stared at each other. The 3 years since their last goodbye, stretching between them like an unbridgeable chasm, filled with unspoken words and unanswered questions. Luke, she finally managed, her voice barely audible above the espresso machine's hiss. How did you... Unable to complete a coherent sentence, Sarah glanced nervously toward the playpen, confirming Luke's suspicions with her panicked expression. I just needed coffee, Luke said, aiming for casual but landing somewhere closer to shell-shocked. My regular place is closed. He tried to appear normal, desperately trying to hide behind the menu board, as if its laminated surface could somehow shield him from the earthquake of emotions threatening to topple him. In his flustered state, Luke took a step backward, colliding with a customer who was carrying their drink to a table. The hot liquid splashed across both their shoes, creating an awkward scene that drew the attention of everyone nearby, including the older woman watching the toddler, who now looked between Sarah and Luke with dawning comprehension. Nervous. I'm so sorry, let me help you with that, Luke stammered, grabbing napkins from the dispenser and accidentally pulling out the entire stack, which scattered across the floor like oversized confetti. The customer, thankfully good-natured, laughed and waved off his continued apologies, but the damage was done. Luke's dignified, organized persona had crumbled in the face of this unexpected encounter, leaving him feeling exposed and vulnerable, in a way he hadn't experienced since the day Sarah had asked for a divorce. Maybe you should sit down, Sarah suggested quietly, nodding to a nearby empty table. Nancy can cover the register for a few minutes. The older woman, Nancy apparently, was already moving toward them, her knowing gaze making it clear she understood something significant was happening. I'll bring you a coffee, Sarah added, not quite meeting Luke's eyes. Still take it black with 1 sugar? The fact that she remembered such a small detail after 3 years apart made something twist painfully in Luke's chest. He nodded mutely and retreated to the indicated table, choosing a seat that gave him a clear view of both Sarah and the toddler, who was now sitting and playing with colorful plastic blocks. Luke's mind raced with calculations. If that was his child, the timing would align with their final months together, when their marriage had already begun to fray, but they were still sharing a home, still occasionally sharing a bed during those bittersweet nights when physical connection bridged the growing emotional distance between them. But why wouldn't she have told him? How could she keep something so monumentally important from him? The questions multiplied, crowding his thoughts until Sarah appeared at his table, setting down a steaming mug before taking the seat across from him. His name is Noah, she said simply, answering the unasked question that hung between them. He's 16 months old. Her fingers nervously traced the edge of the table as she gathered courage to continue. And yes, Luke, he's yours. The confirmation, though expected, hit Luke with the force of a physical blow. He had a son. A child who had been alive for 16 months, while Luke remained completely unaware of his existence. The betrayal cut deep, making it momentarily difficult to breathe as anger and hurt battled with the unexpected surge of longing. He felt looking at the little boy, at Noah, who was enthusiastically stacking blocks only to knock them down with delighted giggles. How could you not tell me? He finally managed, his voice low and tight with emotion. What gave you the right to keep this from me, Sarah? To keep my own child a secret? Sarah flinched at his tone, but met his gaze steadily, a hint of the determination that had once attracted him to her flashing in her eyes. I tried to tell you, Luke, when I found out I was pregnant. You had already accepted that position in Singapore. You were halfway around the world, building your career just like you always wanted. Luke stared at her in disbelief, memories of those turbulent final months rushing back. Their marriage had crumbled under the weight of competing priorities, his driving ambition to advance his career, her desire to start a family and put down roots. The job in Singapore had been the breaking point, a 6-month assignment that Luke had seen as the stepping stone to everything they'd planned together, but which Sarah had viewed as further evidence that his career would always come first. I called you, she continued, her voice dropping to ensure nearby customers couldn't hear. 3 times, actually. The first time your assistant said you were in meetings all day. The second time you were in Hong Kong for a conference. The third time you actually answered, but you were so excited about some big account you'd landed, talking about extending your stay for another 6 months. And I couldn't do it, Luke. I couldn't tell you about a baby over the phone when you were clearly thriving without us. The accusation in her words stung, but Luke couldn't deny the kernel of truth they contained. He had thrown himself into the Singapore assignment, using work as a shield against the pain of their separation, but to keep their child from him. You could have tried harder, he said, the words sharper than he'd intended. An email, a text, something, Sarah. This isn't like forgetting to mention you got a new job or moved apartments. This is our son. As if sensing he was being discussed, Noah looked up at that moment and made direct eye contact with Luke. Then, with the unfiltered friendliness of a toddler, he smiled and waved enthusiastically in Luke's direction. The simple gesture cut through Luke's anger like nothing else could have, leaving him momentarily speechless. He raised his hand and waved back, an automatic response that felt both foreign and completely natural. Sarah watched this exchange, her expression softening slightly. He's friendly with everyone, she said, though the comment seemed designed to prepare Luke for disappointment rather than to truly dismiss the connection. My shift ends at 3, she added after a moment. If you want. If you're free, we could talk more then. There's a park nearby where Noah likes to play. The invitation was tentative, laden with the weight of their complicated history, but Luke didn't hesitate. I'll clear my schedule, he said, firmly, already reaching for his phone to reschedule his afternoon meetings. Some things, he realized with sudden clarity, were far more important than work. The next few hours passed in a blur for Luke. He went through the motions of his morning meeting, somehow managing to present his findings on operational efficiency with a coherence that belied the chaos in his mind. His client seemed pleased, unaware that behind Luke's professional demeanor, a storm of emotions was raging. Anger, confusion, hurt, but also an unexpected and overwhelming sense of longing for the child he'd just discovered. He found himself checking the time obsessively, counting down the minutes until 3 o'clock. At 2:30, unable to focus on anything work-related, Luke left his office and returned to the cafe, choosing an outdoor table where he could see through the window, but wouldn't be immediately noticeable to Sarah. He watched as she worked, efficiently taking orders and chatting easily with customers, occasionally checking on Noah, who had fallen asleep in his playpen. There was a new confidence in her movements that hadn't been there during their marriage. Or perhaps it had been, and he had been too absorbed in his own ambitions to notice. The thought was uncomfortable, forcing Luke to confront aspects of their failed relationship that he had carefully avoided examining too closely in the years since their divorce. When Sarah emerged from the cafe at precisely 3 o'clock, she had changed out of her work apron into jeans and a simple blue sweater that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. Noah was bundled in a red jacket that made him look adorably, like a tiny firefighter, securely strapped into a stroller with a plush dinosaur clutched in his small hands. Luke stood as they approached, suddenly uncertain of the protocol for this unprecedented situation. Should he shake Sarah's hand? Hug her? Simply nod in greeting? In the end, she made the decision for him, offering a small tentative smile as she said, "The park's just a few blocks this way if you're ready." They walked in awkward silence for the first minute, the only sounds coming from Noah's occasional happy babbles and the wheels of the stroller on the sidewalk. Finally, Luke cleared his throat and asked, "So, the morning brew? That's different from marketing." It was a neutral observation, safer than the more pressing questions about their son. Sarah nodded, seeming grateful for the mundane topic. "My friend Nancy, you saw her today. She owns it. After the divorce, and then the baby. Well, corporate? Ours aren't exactly compatible with single motherhood. Nancy offered me flexibility and a way to bring Noah with me to work." The mention of single motherhood sent another pang through Luke's chest, a role she'd been forced to assume alone because he hadn't known about his own child. "It's temporary," Sarah continued, misinterpreting his silence as judgment. "I do freelance marketing work in the evenings after Noah's asleep, building my client base slowly. Nancy's been, well, she's been a lifesaver, honestly." The genuine affection in Sarah's voice when she spoke of her friend made Luke realize how little he knew about her life now. The support systems she'd built, the challenges she'd faced, all while raising their son alone. They reached the park, a small but well-maintained space with a playground that was busy but not crowded with after-school children. Sarah unstrapped Noah from the stroller, and he immediately squirmed to be put down, eager to join the other children. "He's walking already?" Luke asked, unable to hide his amazement as Noah toddled confidently toward the sandbox. "Since 10 months," Sarah replied, a proud smile lighting her face. "The pediatrician says he's advanced for his age. He's already got about 20 words, too." The pride in her voice was unmistakable, a mother's joy in her child's accomplishments. And Luke felt a sharp stab of regret for all the milestones he'd missed. First smile, first word, first steps. They settled on a bench with a clear view of Noah, who was happily filling a bucket with sand, occasionally looking up to make sure his mother was still watching. "He looks exactly like you," Sarah said softly, following Luke's gaze. "I have your mother's email. I've sent her pictures every month since he was born." This new revelation hit Luke hard. "My mother knows? She's seen pictures?" The hurt in his voice was undisguised now. Sarah turned to face him directly, her expression a complex mixture of guilt and defiance. "She reached out to me, actually, about 4 months after Noah was born. Apparently, one of our old neighbors ran into me at the grocery store and saw the baby. Word got back to your mom." She paused, seeming to consider her next words carefully. "She was angry at first, furious actually. Showed up at my apartment unannounced, demanding to know why I'd kept her grandchild from her, from you, but once I explained how I'd tried to reach you, how wrapped up you were in your new life overseas." Sarah shrugged, leaving the rest unsaid. "We came to an understanding. She gets pictures and occasional video calls with Noah. She's respected. My request not to tell you, though I know it's been hard for her." The knowledge that even his own mother had been complicit in keeping this secret sent a fresh wave of betrayal washing over Luke. He would be having a very pointed conversation with her later. "I know you're angry," Sarah said, correctly reading his expression. "You have every right to be. But Luke, you need to understand something. When I found out I was pregnant, we were already divorced. You were building your new life, and I was trying to figure out mine. Telling you felt like reopening a wound that was finally starting to heal." Her honesty was both refreshing and painful, forcing Luke to remember the raw, jagged edges of their separation. "We weren't in a good place," she continued, "and selfishly I was afraid. Vulnerable." "Afraid of what?" Luke asked, his voice gentler now. Sarah looked away, watching Noah play as she answered, "Afraid you'd either want nothing to do with us, which would hurt, or that you'd want to be involved but on your terms. Scheduled visits and shared holidays and court-mandated custody arrangements. I wasn't ready for either option." While part of Luke wanted to argue, to defend himself against her assumptions, another part recognized the legitimacy of her fears. Their breakup had been bitter toward the end, with harsh words exchanged that neither truly meant, but couldn't, take back. "I would have come home," he said finally, the words heavy with conviction. "If I'd known about him, I would have come back immediately." Sarah nodded slowly. "Maybe. But would it have been for him? Or for us? And would you have resented giving up the career you'd worked so hard for?" These were uncomfortable questions without easy answers. Before Luke could respond, A delighted squeal drew their attention back to the sandbox, where Noah had successfully filled his bucket and was now attempting to turn it over to make a sand castle. Instinctively, both Luke and Sarah moved toward him, kneeling on opposite sides to help. "Like this, buddy," Luke said, gently placing his much larger hands over Noah's tiny ones to show him how to flip the bucket. When they lifted it to reveal a perfect sand tower, Noah's face lit up with such pure joy that Luke felt something fundamental shift within him. A protective, fierce love that he'd never experienced before, stunning in its immediacy and depth. The rest of the afternoon unfolded with a surreal quality, as Luke found himself drawn into Noah's world of simple pleasures and constant discoveries. They moved from the sandbox to the swings, where Noah's infectious giggles with each gentle push made Luke's chest tight with emotion. They watched a line of ants carrying crumbs, Noah pointing and exclaiming, "Bug!" with such enthusiasm that several nearby parents smiled indulgently. They chased bubbles that Sarah blew from a small bottle she produced from her bag, Noah's coordination impressive as he attempted to catch the iridescent spheres floating on the breeze. Through it all, Luke observed his son with wonder, and Sarah with growing appreciation for the mother she had become, patient, attentive, completely present in a way that made him uncomfortably aware of how often he had been physically present, but mentally elsewhere during their marriage. When Noah began to rub his eyes and grow fussy, Sarah announced it was time for his afternoon snack. They settled at a picnic table, where she produced apple slices and small cheese cubes from an insulated bag. Playful. "Want to try feeding him?" she offered, holding out a plastic container. "Fair warning, he's in a phase where he likes to share. But his definition of sharing sometimes means shoving food into your mouth, whether you're ready or not." Luke accepted the container with more nervousness than he'd felt before major business presentations. Noah watched him curiously. From his perch on Sarah's lap, those familiar green eyes, his eyes, regarding him with innocent interest. "Hey, Noah," Luke said gently, holding out an apple slice. "Are you hungry, buddy?" To his surprise and delight, Noah reached for the offered food with an enthusiastic "app" before stuffing it into his mouth. A moment later, true to Sarah's warning, Noah pulled another slice from the container and held it up to Luke's face with clear expectation. "He wants you to eat it," Sarah translated unnecessarily, amusement dancing in her eyes. Luke obediently opened his mouth, allowing his son to feed him with all the coordination one might expect from a 16-month-old, which is to say, the apple slice hit partly his mouth and partly his cheek. Luke made an exaggerated "mmm" sound that caused Noah to burst into delighted laughter, a pure, bell-like sound that Luke immediately wanted to hear again and again. Encouraged, Luke tried to reciprocate the entertainment. He picked up 3 apple slices and attempted to juggle them, a skill he'd briefly mastered in college to impress fraternity brothers. His rusty performance sent the fruit flying, one slice landing perfectly in the nearby duck pond, attracting a small flock of quacking birds. This apparent magic trick, making food disappear and summoning ducks, had Noah absolutely howling with laughter, bouncing excitedly on Sarah's lap. Do gain," he demanded, the first direct words he'd spoken to Luke. Sarah watched this interaction with a complicated expression, joy at her son's happiness, mixed with something bittersweet, as she witnessed what could have been their reality all along. "He likes you," she said softly when Noah's attention had been momentarily captured by the ducks now gathering near the edge of the pond. "He's not usually this comfortable with strangers." The word strangers hung painfully between them. Luke should never have been a stranger to his own son. "Sarah," he began, needing to address the elephant that had been following them all afternoon, "we need to talk about where we go from here, about Noah, about arrangements." He saw her tense slightly, the defensiveness returning to her posture. "I'm not going to take you to court or make demands," he clarified quickly. "But he's my son too. I want to be part of his life, a real part, not just weekend visits or holiday photos." Noah chose that moment to lean over and grab Luke's nose, a spontaneous gesture of familiarity that seemed to underscore his point. Sarah gently removed Noah's hand, but nodded. I know, and you're right. He deserves to have his father in his life. Maybe we could continue this conversation over dinner, somewhere we can really talk after he's in bed. The invitation surprised Luke, but he nodded immediately. I'd like that. Your place? Sarah hesitated briefly before agreeing. 7:30? I can put him down by 7. It's nothing fancy. I'm in a small apartment above the cafe, actually. Nancy rents it to me at a reduced rate. This new piece of information added to Luke's growing understanding of Sarah's life now, so different from the luxury condo they had shared during their marriage, with its skyline views and designer furniture. I'll bring dinner, he offered. Still like that Thai place on Maple? Sarah smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes for the first time that day. You remember. It wasn't a question, but Luke answered anyway. I remember a lot of things. More than he had allowed himself to acknowledge in the years since their separation. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. How she always read the last page of a book first, a habit that had driven him crazy. The specific tone of her laugh when something caught her genuinely off guard. The familiar ache of these memories was joined now by a new pain, the realization of how much else he had missed by not being present for this chapter of her life, for the earliest chapter of his son's life. The apartment above the cafe was exactly as Sarah had described it, small but homey, with the hodgepodge furniture and creative storage solutions of someone making the best of limited space. Toys were neatly contained in colorful bins, and photos of Noah lined the walls, documenting his growth from newborn to toddler. Luke noticed with a pang that in many of the more recent photos, Noah was wearing clothes featuring characters from Dinosaur Adventures, a children's show that Luke himself had loved as a child, further evidence of the genetic connection he could see so clearly in his son's features. Sarah emerged from a hallway that presumably led to the bedrooms, closing a door gently behind her. He went down easily, she said, keeping her voice low. All that excitement at the park wore him out. She gestured toward the small dining table where Luke had already unpacked the Thai food containers. Thank you for bringing dinner. It smells amazing. I can't remember the last time I had it. The comment was casual, but it highlighted yet another difference in their current lives. While Luke still regularly indulged in takeout from the city's best restaurants, Sarah was clearly living on a much tighter budget, one that likely didn't include frequent culinary luxuries. They ate in relative silence at first, the familiar flavors providing a strange backdrop to this unfamiliar situation. Finally, Luke set down his fork and asked the question that had been burning in him all day. Why the cafe, Sarah? You had a brilliant career in marketing. You were on track to make director before. He trailed off, not wanting to say, before we split up, so directly. Sarah sighed, pushing her food around her plate. Before life happened, she finished for him. The cafe wasn't my first choice, obviously. But when I found out I was pregnant, I was between jobs. You remember I had just left Mitchell & Associates because of that toxic VP. Luke nodded. He did remember. Their last big fight before Singapore had centered around whether she should have quit without another position lined up. Being visibly pregnant while job hunting isn't exactly advantageous, she continued. And then once Noah arrived, well, childcare costs more than most entry-level marketing positions pay. Nancy offered me flexible hours, the apartment upstairs, and the ability to keep Noah with me. It was a lifeline when I really needed one. The matter-of-fact way she described these practical challenges made Luke realize how sheltered he had been from the realities she'd faced, not by her design, but by his absence and the comfortable financial cushion his career provided. I would have helped, he said quietly, financially at least, if I'd known. Sarah nodded, acknowledging the truth of this. I know you would have. That's partly why I didn't tell you, honestly. I was afraid of becoming dependent of Noah. Becoming a transaction between us. She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. I wanted to prove, to myself maybe more than anyone, that I could do this on my own. That I wasn't a failure because our marriage ended, because my career took a detour. Pride, I guess. The honesty in her admission was disarming. Luke could recognize the same determined independence that had attracted him to her years ago when they'd met at a marketing conference where she'd boldly challenged a speaker's outdated approach. Sincere. You're not a failure, Sarah. From what I've seen today, you're an amazing mother. Noah is happy, healthy, clearly thriving. You've done an incredible job with him. The compliment brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes, which she quickly blinked away. Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know. She took a deep breath, seeming to gather herself. So, what are you thinking? About your role in Noah's life going forward? The directness of the question was pure. Sarah, cutting through pleasantries to the heart of the matter. Luke had been considering this very question all afternoon and evening, examining it from every angle with the same analytical approach he brought to business problems. I want to be his father, he said simply. Not just in name or on occasional weekends. I want to be actively involved in his life, his routine, his future. I've already missed 16 months. I don't want to miss any more. He hesitated before adding, I know it complicates things. I know we have history, but I'm hoping we can figure out a co-parenting arrangement that puts Noah first. I'm willing to work around your schedule, to learn what he needs, to support you both however I can. Sarah studied him for a long moment, as if trying to gauge his sincerity. That sounds good in theory, Luke. But your life is still, well, it's the same life that didn't have room for a family 3 years ago. 60-hour work weeks, international travel, constant client emergencies. There was no accusation in her tone, just a pragmatic assessment of realities that had contributed to their marriage's demise. Things can change, Luke countered. I can change. Finding out about Noah. It puts everything in perspective. Even as he said the words, Luke knew they sounded like clichés, the kind of sweeping declarations that were easy to make in moments of emotional intensity, but harder to sustain in day-to-day life. Sarah seemed to have the same thought, offering a small, skeptical smile. Change isn't that simple, Luke. Not the kind that lasts. Before he could argue further, a plaintive cry came from the bedroom. Noah, apparently awakened from his sleep. Sarah started to rise, but Luke stood first. Can I? Unless he'll be scared to see me. She hesitated, then nodded. His room is the first door on the left. There's a nightlight. He might need his pacifier. It's shaped like a dinosaur, probably under his blanket somewhere. Luke entered his son's room for the first time, his heart pounding with nervousness and anticipation. The small space was cozy and thoughtfully decorated with a dinosaur theme. Wall decals of friendly prehistoric creatures, a bookshelf filled with board books, and a crib where Noah stood holding onto the rails, his little face tear-streaked, but curious at the sight of his unexpected visitor. Hey, buddy, Luke said softly, approaching slowly. Did you wake up? To his surprise and relief, Noah didn't seem frightened by his presence, merely regarding him with sleepy confusion. Luke tentatively reached into the crib, and when Noah raised his arms in the universal gesture requesting to be picked up, he carefully lifted his son for the first time. The weight of the small body against his chest, the trusting way Noah immediately laid his head on Luke's shoulder, created a lump in his throat that made it difficult to speak. He found the dinosaur pacifier half hidden in the tangled blanket and gently offered it to Noah, who accepted it with a contented sigh. Luke began to sway slightly, an instinctive rocking motion that seemed to soothe the child. It's okay, he whispered, one hand cradling Noah's head, feeling the silky softness of hair so similar to his own. Dad's here now. The word dad fell from his lips naturally, though he immediately wondered if it was presumptuous, if Sarah had used another term for him when talking to Noah, or if she'd mentioned him at all. But there was something powerful, almost primal, about claiming the role aloud, about making the promise implicit in those words, "Dad's here now." Luke wasn't sure how long he stood there, rocking gently, before he realized Noah had fallen back, asleep, his breathing deep and even against Luke's neck. With extreme care, he lowered the sleeping child back into the crib, tucking the dinosaur-patterned blanket around him. He stood watching Noah sleep for several minutes, memorizing the peaceful face, the tiny hand curled around the pacifier, the rise and fall of the small chest. When he finally stepped out of the room, quietly pulling the door mostly closed behind him, he found Sarah waiting in the hallway, her expression soft and unguarded in a way he hadn't seen in years. "You're a natural," she said quietly, leading the way back to the living room. He doesn't usually take to strangers like that. The word strangers hit Luke again, but this time he pushed past the pain it caused, focusing instead on the path forward. "I don't want to be a stranger to him, Sarah. I want to be his father, in every sense of the word." They settled on the couch, the remains of dinner forgotten on the table. "I believe you mean that right now," Sarah said carefully. "But Luke, parenting isn't something you can approach like a business project. You can't optimize it or delegate the hard parts or reschedule when something more important comes up. It's constant, it's exhausting, and it's often thankless." Luke couldn't help but feel stung by the implication that he viewed everything through a business lens, though he knew there was some truth to it. "I understand it will require changes," he said, measuring his words. "I'm prepared to make them. I can adjust my work schedule, limit travel, be available when Noah needs me." Sarah didn't look entirely convinced, and Luke felt a flash of the frustration that had often characterized their final arguments. Her apparent certainty that he couldn't or wouldn't change, his resentment of being prejudged and found wanting. Before either could say anything that might derail the conversation, a loud crash from the kitchen startled them both. They rushed to find a very awake Noah, who had somehow escaped his crib and toddled to the kitchen, where he was now sitting. Amid a sea of pots and pans he'd pulled from a low cabinet, a wooden spoon clutched triumphantly in his hand. Surprised. "How did you—" Sarah began, then shook her head with a mixture of exasperation and amusement. "He's figured out how to climb out of the crib. I was hoping we had a few more months before that happened." Noah beamed up at them, clearly pleased with his accomplishment and the chaos he'd created. He banged the spoon against a pot with enthusiasm, creating a noise that would have been annoying if his expression of pure joy hadn't been so captivating. Luke couldn't help laughing at the scene. This tiny person with his face, proudly sitting among kitchen equipment like a pint-sized drummer. After a moment, Sarah joined in, her laughter mingling with his in a way that felt achingly familiar. Together, they crouched down to Noah's level, Sarah capturing the wooden spoon while Luke began gathering the scattered cookware. Noah, apparently, deciding this was a new and exciting game, began helping by taking the pots Luke had collected and dumping them out again, giggling madly at his own cleverness. Playful. "I don't think we're winning this one," Luke observed, watching as Noah systematically undid their cleanup efforts. Sarah smiled, shaking her head. "Welcome to toddlerhood, where the games are made up and your plans don't matter." The casual comment, "welcome to toddlerhood," struck Luke profoundly. It wasn't just a quip. It was an acknowledgement that he was now part of this world, invited into the daily rhythms and challenges of raising their son. Eventually, they managed to restore order to the kitchen, though it required Sarah reading 3 dinosaur-themed bedtime stories before Noah finally surrendered to sleep again. Luke listened from the doorway, captivated by Sarah's animated storytelling, complete with different voices for each character and questions that engaged Noah, despite his drooping eyelids. When she emerged from the bedroom the second time, she looked exhausted but satisfied. He's really out now. That climbing adventure took whatever energy he had left. They returned to the living room. The atmosphere between them somehow shifted by the shared experience of parenting, even in this small way. "This is what it's like," Sarah said, sinking onto the couch. "The chaos, the constant surprises, the impossible task of staying one step ahead of a tiny person who seems determined to find new and creative ways to give you heart attacks." There was no complaint in her voice, only a factual description of the life she'd been living while Luke pursued his career ambitions. "I want to be part of it," he said simply. "All of it, the chaos, the sleep deprivation, the heart attacks. I want to learn how to be a father to him." He paused, gathering courage for what he wanted to say next. "And maybe we could see if there's still something worth salvaging between us too." The words hung in the air between them, laden with history and possibility. Sarah's expression was guarded, but not dismissive. "Luke, we hurt each other. A lot. The issues that drove us apart haven't magically disappeared because we have a child together." It was a fair point, one Luke had been contemplating all day. "You're right," he acknowledged. "But we're different people now than we were 3 years ago. I know I am." He leaned forward, wanting her to see his sincerity. "The man who put career above everything, who couldn't understand why you weren't willing to uproot your life for my job opportunity? He got a serious wake-up call today. Seeing you with Noah, realizing what I've missed, it changes perspective in ways I can't fully explain yet." Sarah studied him, her expression thoughtful. "People say that," she said carefully, "that having a child changes everything. And it does. It changed me. But Luke, this is day one for you. The reality of parenthood is both more wonderful and more challenging than what you've glimpsed. Today, and rebuilding trust between us, that would take time, a lot of it." Luke nodded, accepting the caution in her response. "I'm not asking for promises or commitments," he clarified. "Just openness to the possibility that we could find our way back to something good, as co-parents first and foremost, but maybe eventually as more." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "I can be open to possibilities," she conceded. "But we need to move slowly, establish boundaries, figure out how you're going to be part of Noah's routine before we complicate things by—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Before they revisited any romantic feelings that might still exist between them. "That's fair," Luke agreed, relieved that she hadn't rejected the idea outright. "We focus on Noah, on creating stability for him. Everything else is secondary." The conversation shifted then to more practical matters. How Luke could begin spending regular time with Noah, what his schedule and needs were, the routines Sarah had established. It was nearly midnight when Luke reluctantly prepared to leave, both of them aware that Noah would be awake with the sun, regardless of how late they stayed up talking. At the door, Luke hesitated. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For today, for letting me meet him, for being willing to move forward together somehow." Sarah nodded, her expression tired but peaceful. "He deserves to have you in his life. And despite everything, I always thought you'd be a good father if you chose to be." The qualification was gentle but pointed, if you chose to be. Luke understood the implied challenge in her words. "I'm choosing it now," he said firmly. "I'll be back tomorrow, if that's okay. Maybe I could take him to the park while you have some time to yourself." The suggestion earned him a genuine smile. "That sounds really nice, actually. But fair. Warning, he has strong opinions about which slide is acceptable and which swings are best. And he might make you push the same truck around the sandbox for an hour straight." Luke grinned, already looking forward to it. "I'll consider myself warned." As he stepped into the hallway, he added, "Good night, Sarah," the familiar farewell, carrying new weight after this extraordinary day. She smiled, a small but genuine expression. "Good night, Luke. We'll see you tomorrow." The 3 months that followed were transformative for all of them. Luke dove into fatherhood with the same intensity and focus he brought to business challenges, but with a different kind of joy he'd never experienced in the corporate world. He adjusted his work schedule dramatically, delegating responsibilities to his team and limiting travel to day trips when possible. His colleagues were surprised by the change, but Luke found he cared less about their opinions than he once had. He spent every moment he could with Noah, gradually earning his son's trust and affection. Within weeks, Noah was calling him Dada, the sound never failing to create a swell of emotion in Luke's chest. He learned the particular way Noah liked his banana sliced, in coins, never lengthwise, which stuffed animal was essential for nap time, a well-worn triceratops named Tops, and how to navigate the inevitable tantrums that came with toddlerhood. More surprisingly, Luke found he enjoyed these challenges. The puzzle of understanding his son's developing mind, the satisfaction of being the one to comfort him after a fall, the simple pleasure of watching Noah master new skills and words. His relationship with Sarah evolved more cautiously, rebuilding trust through shared parenting responsibilities and open communication. They established a comfortable routine, with Luke taking Noah on weekend mornings so Sarah could attend a yoga class she'd previously had to abandon, and Luke working from the cafe some afternoons so he could spend time with Noah during breaks. They began having dinner together several times a week, sometimes just the three of them, sometimes including Nancy or other friends from Sarah's new life. Gradually, the awkwardness between them faded, replaced by a partnership focused on Noah's well-being, but with occasional glimpses of the connection that had drawn them together years ago. Luke found himself noticing things about Sarah he'd overlooked during their marriage. Her creativity in finding ways to engage Noah's growing mind, her resilience in the face of challenges, the quiet confidence she'd developed as a single mother. For her part, Sarah observed with cautious optimism how completely Luke had rearranged his priorities, the genuine joy he found in fatherhood, and his willingness to adapt to their circumstances rather than imposing his own vision. The turning point in their evolving relationship came unexpectedly on a rainy Tuesday in late January. Luke arrived at the cafe to find it unusually quiet, with Sarah deep in conversation with Nancy at the counter, both women looking concerned. When Sarah saw him, relief washed over her face. "Luke, thank goodness you're here. We just got some news." Nancy patted Sarah's shoulder supportively before stepping away to give them privacy. "The building's been sold," Sarah explained, her voice tight with worry. "The new owners are planning to renovate the entire block, upscale retail. On the ground floor, luxury condos above. Nancy got the official notice this morning. The cafe has to close in 60 days, and—" She swallowed hard. "We need to vacate the apartment by the same deadline." The implications were immediately clear to Luke. This wasn't just about Sarah losing her job. It was about their son losing his home, about the stability they'd been carefully building being suddenly threatened. Luke's first instinct was to offer money, to buy the building himself, to find them a new apartment, to solve the problem with the financial resources he had in abundance. But he caught himself, remembering Sarah's fierce independence and her previous resistance to feeling indebted to him. Thoughtful. "What are you thinking?" he asked instead, giving her the space to process the situation on her own terms. Sarah ran a hand through her hair, a gesture of frustration Luke remembered well from their marriage. "I don't know yet. Nancy's looking into whether she can afford to relocate the cafe to another location, but commercial rents in this area have skyrocketed. And finding an affordable apartment that would allow me to keep Noah with me while I work." She trailed off, the challenge evident in her expression. "What about your freelance marketing? You mentioned you've been building a client base," Luke suggested. Sarah nodded slowly. "It's growing, but not enough to support us fully yet. Maybe in another year." The timeline clearly didn't align with their immediate need. Luke considered the situation carefully, wanting to offer support without overstepping. "I might know someone who could help," he said tentatively. "A former client who specializes in commercial real estate. She owes me a favor after I helped restructure her company last year. Maybe she could help Nancy find an affordable location for the cafe, and possibly a place with an apartment above it, similar to this setup. He was careful to frame it as connecting them with resources rather than swooping in to solve the problem himself, respecting Sarah's agency while still providing meaningful assistance. Sarah looked at him with surprise and what might have been the beginning of gratitude. "You'd do that?" Luke's response was immediate and sincere. "Of course. Noah needs stability, and this place, this community you've built here, it's good for him. For both of you." He hesitated, then added, "For all of us, actually. I've come to value being able to stop by to be part of his daily routine here. I want to help preserve that, if I can." The honesty in his words seemed to touch something in Sarah. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly, the first time she had initiated physical contact since his return to their lives. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'd appreciate any help your contact might offer." That afternoon, Luke made several calls, pulling strings he wouldn't normally access for business purposes. By evening, he had arranged for Nancy to view 3 potential cafe locations, all within their budget and zoning requirements. One of them, a charming corner property just 6 blocks from the current location, included a 2-bedroom apartment, above the storefront that the owner was willing to include in the commercial lease, a rare find in the competitive rental market. When Luke shared this news with Sarah over dinner at her apartment, while Noah happily smashed peas on his high-chair tray, her reaction wasn't what he expected. Instead of immediate relief or excitement, she studied him with an unreadable expression. "You're different," she finally said. Luke paused, a forkful of chicken halfway to his mouth. "Different how?" Sarah set down her napkin, choosing her words carefully. "The Luke I was married to would have solved this problem by throwing money at it. Buying the building outright, setting up a trust fund for Noah, maybe offering to get me a job at one of your client companies. You would have fixed it efficiently, impressively, and with minimal consideration for how it might make me feel dependent or obligated." There was no accusation in her tone, just a thoughtful observation. "But instead, you asked what I wanted. You offered a connection that helps us help ourselves. You understood that my dignity and independence matter as much as the practical outcome." Luke absorbed this assessment, realizing she was right. 3 months ago, even 3 weeks ago, his first instinct would have been to solve the problem the fastest way possible, using his financial resources rather than considering the more complex emotional and relational aspects. "I'm trying to be better," he said simply. "To see the whole picture, not just the parts I know how to fix." He glanced at Noah, who had abandoned his peas in favor of attempting to feed his dinosaur toy some mashed potatoes. "He's teaching me a lot, actually. That the best solutions aren't always the most efficient ones. That sometimes success looks like a very messy high chair and a laughing toddler, not a perfectly executed business plan." Sarah's expression softened into something that looked remarkably like tenderness. "It suits you," she said quietly. "This version of you. The one who helps without taking over, who shows up consistently even when it's inconvenient, who notices what Noah and I actually need instead of what you think we should want." The words warmed Luke in a way that the most glowing business praise never had. "Well," he said, attempting to lighten the suddenly emotional moment, "I had a good teacher." He nodded toward Noah, who chose that exact moment to loudly proclaim, "Done," and attempt to climb out of his high chair, demonstrating both his expanding vocabulary and his continuing disregard for safety considerations. Their shared laughter as they both lunged to catch him before he tumbled to the floor felt like a turning point, a moment of genuine connection forged through the shared adventure of parenting. After Noah was bathed, read to, and finally asleep, they returned to the living room with cups of tea, the conversation flowing more easily than it had since Luke's return. "So," Sarah said, curling her legs beneath her on the couch, "Nancy and I are viewing those properties tomorrow, if one of them works out. I was thinking maybe we could talk about a more structured arrangement for Noah. Now that you've been consistently part of his life for a while, maybe overnight visits, if you're comfortable with that." The offer sent a surge of emotion through Luke. Trust, gratitude, and something deeper he wasn't quite ready to name. "I'd like that very much," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I've been thinking about looking for a new place myself, actually. Something more family-friendly than my downtown condo, with a real bedroom for Noah, a park nearby, that sort of thing." The implications of this planning, of creating a space in his home and life specifically designed for his son, hung between them, evidence of his long-term commitment. Sarah nodded approvingly. "He'd like that. He talks about you all the time now, you know. Dada truck when he sees vehicles like yours. Dada work when he plays with his toy laptop." These small details, evidence that he was becoming a fixed presence in his son's world, filled Luke with quiet joy. They talked for hours that night, slipping almost unconsciously from co-parenting discussions into more personal territories. Memories from their relationship before things had soured, updates on mutual friends they'd lost touch with during their separation, cautious sharing of the journeys they'd each taken during their time apart. It was well past midnight when Luke reluctantly rose to leave, aware that his early meeting the next day couldn't be rescheduled, and that Noah would have Sarah up at dawn regardless of how late she stayed up talking. At the door, there was a moment of hesitation, both of them feeling the shift in their dynamic, but uncertain how to acknowledge it. Finally, Sarah said softly, "Thank you, Luke. Not just for the real estate help, but for everything these past months, for being the father Noah deserves." Luke looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the woman she had become in their years apart. Stronger, more grounded, with a quiet confidence that came from navigating challenges on her own terms. Without overthinking, he leaned forward and kissed her cheek, a brief, gentle touch that lingered just long enough to convey affection without presumption. "Thank you for giving me the chance to be that father," he replied, "and for being patient while I figured out how." Something flashed in Sarah's eyes, a warmth that had been absent in their early interactions, but she simply nodded and said, "Good night, Luke." As he walked to his car, Luke realized he felt lighter than he had in years, as though pieces of his life that had been misaligned were finally shifting into their proper places. The future remained uncertain, the cafe situation unresolved, his relationship with Sarah still evolving. But for perhaps the first time since finding out about Noah, Luke felt not just responsibility, but genuine optimism about what lay ahead for all of them. The corner property proved to be perfect, spacious enough for the cafe to grow, with large windows that flooded the space with natural light, and an apartment above that was slightly larger than Sarah's current one. Nancy signed the lease, with palpable relief, and the planning for the Morning Brew 2. Irao began in earnest. Luke found himself unexpectedly involved in the process, offering business insights when asked but careful not to overstep. Sarah took on the marketing for the new location, creating a buzz in the neighborhood before they'd even opened, her natural talent for the work evident in the growing interest from both existing customers and potential new ones. Meanwhile, Luke found a house in a family-friendly neighborhood with excellent schools. Not extravagantly large, but warm and welcoming, with a fenced backyard perfect for a toddler to explore. He furnished one bedroom specifically for Noah, incorporating the dinosaur theme his son loved, but with furniture that would grow with him, a thoughtful touch that didn't escape Sarah's notice when she brought Noah for his first overnight stay. That evening had been a milestone for all of them. Luke's first time solely responsible for Noah's bedtime routine, Sarah's first night away from her son since his birth, Noah's first night in a new environment that was now officially part of his expanding world. Luke had been nervous, but determined, following Sarah's detailed instructions with careful attention to the comfort objects and routines that would help Noah feel secure. To everyone's relief, the night had gone surprisingly well. Noah had explored his new room with delighted curiosity, especially captivated by the ceiling Luke had painted with glow-in-the-dark stars and dinosaur constellations. Bedtime had included an extra story and a brief period of missing Mama, soothed by a video call and Luke's patient reassurance. In the morning, when Sarah arrived earlier than planned, unable to sleep without Noah nearby, she had found them, both in the kitchen, Noah perched safely in his high chair while Luke made dinosaur-shaped pancakes, both of them wearing matching aprons that Luke had ordered online, covered in cartoon triceratops. The cafe's grand reopening coincided with Noah's second birthday, turning the event into a dual celebration that brought together the community that had supported Sarah and their growing circle of shared friends. Luke watched with quiet pride as Sarah confidently welcomed guests to the new space, her marketing efforts having paid off with a line that stretched around the block. Noah toddled between them throughout the day, now fully comfortable with both parents, occasionally bringing toys or books to show Luke with the expectation that his father would be interested in whatever had captured his attention. A trust that Luke cherished. Late in the afternoon, as the crowd began to thin, Luke found himself standing beside Sarah at the counter, both of them watching as Nancy entertained Noah with a puppet show behind the display case. "You did it," he said quietly, offering the simple acknowledgement of her achievement. "You took a crisis and turned it into something even better than before." Sarah smiled, the expression reaching her eyes and creating the small dimple that Luke had always found endearing. "We did it," she corrected gently. "I'm not sure I could have managed all this alone, especially while taking care of a very active, almost 2-year-old. The admission that she valued his contribution, that they worked well as a team, felt significant. Over the past months, Luke had been careful not to push for more than Sarah was ready to give, focusing on building trust through reliable co-parenting and respectful support. But the feelings that had begun stirring the moment he'd seen her again in the cafe had only deepened as he'd witnessed her strength as a mother, her resilience in the face of challenges, and her generosity in allowing him to become part of their lives, despite the pain of their past. "Sarah," he began, uncertain how to express what he was feeling but knowing it needed to be said. "These last few months, watching you with Noah, building this new version of our lives together but separate, it's made me realize something." She turned to face him fully, her expression curious but not guarded. Luke took a deep breath, finding courage in the open way she was looking at him. "I think I understand now why our marriage didn't work before. I was so focused on building a life I thought we should want, the careers, the status, the achievements, that I missed what actually mattered: connection, presence, building something together rather than just alongside each other." Sarah's expression softened, a complexity of emotions moving across her face. "I've been thinking about that too," she admitted quietly. "We were so young, so driven in different directions. And I don't think either of us really knew how to communicate what we needed." She glanced at Noah, who was now attempting to feed a cookie to Nancy's puppet, his giggles floating across the cafe. "Having him forced me to learn that, to be clear about priorities, to ask for help when I need it, to put connection before pride." Luke nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "I keep wondering," he said carefully, "what might be possible now that we've both grown, both learned those lessons separately. If there might be a chance for—" He trailed off, not wanting to presume or pressure. Sarah was silent for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. Then, with characteristic directness, she reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that felt both familiar and new. "Maybe it's time we found out," she said simply. The warmth of her palm against his, the tentative hope in her expression, created a surge of emotion that Luke didn't try to contain or analyze, just felt, fully and without reservation. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of rediscovery, shared parenting responsibilities gradually expanding to include true dates, conversations that stretched late into the night after Noah was asleep, cautious physical affection that carried the weight of their history but also the promise of something new. They moved slowly, both acutely aware of what was at stake, of the little boy who was now the center of both their worlds. Their first official date was to a restaurant they had never visited during their marriage, a neutral territory where they could be simply Luke and Sarah, rather than the former Mr. and Mrs. Anderson. They talked about everything and nothing. Noah's latest verbal explosion, suddenly using full sentences seemingly overnight, the book Sarah was reading, Luke's decision to scale back his client list to focus on quality over quantity. When Luke walked her to her door afterward, their goodnight kiss was tentative at first, then deepened with the comfortable familiarity of two people who knew each other well, but were discovering something new in the connection. As winter melted into spring, their rekindled relationship bloomed alongside the flowers in the park, where they now spent weekend mornings as a family, watching Noah's delight in puddles and dandelions. They still maintained separate households, a boundary that felt important as they navigated this new chapter. But the lines between their lives grew increasingly blurred. Luke kept a toothbrush at Sarah's apartment. Sarah left a change of clothes at his house. They developed inside jokes and shorthand references that made Nancy roll her eyes good-naturedly. "You two are disgustingly cute," she informed them one afternoon at the cafe, after witnessing an exchange that consisted entirely of raised eyebrows and suppressed smiles. "It's like watching teenagers, except with more intelligence and a way better fashion sense." The observation made them both laugh, acknowledging the truth in it. There was something youthful in their rediscovered connection, a freshness that their first relationship had lacked, despite being chronologically younger then. The true test of their new dynamic came unexpectedly, when Noah developed a high fever that rapidly escalated into an emergency room visit at 2 a.m. Luke had been staying at Sarah's that night, and the crisis brought out both the best and most challenging aspects of their personalities. Sarah's tendency to research every possible scenario, Luke's impulse to take control of the situation. Both of them channeling their fear into action, but occasionally stepping on each other's toes in the process. Yet even in the midst of worry and exhaustion, they found a rhythm that worked, supporting each other through the terrifying hours until Noah's fever finally broke, and the doctor confirmed it was nothing more serious than a nasty virus. As they drove home in the pale light of dawn, Noah finally sleeping peacefully in his car seat, Sarah reached across the console to take Luke's hand. "Thank you," she said simply, "for being there, for being steady." The words carried weight beyond this single incident. Acknowledgement of the consistent presence he had become in both their lives, so different from the ambitious but often absent husband he had been before. One evening in late spring, after Noah had been tucked in with his dinosaurs and favorite stories, Luke and Sarah sat on the small balcony of her apartment above the cafe, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. They had been discussing practical matters, Noah's preschool options for the fall, the logistics of their increasingly intertwined schedules, when Luke suddenly set down his wine glass and turned to face Sarah directly. "I've been thinking," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant, "about us, about Noah, about how much I love the life we've been building these past months." Sarah's expression was open, encouraging him to continue. "I know we're taking things slowly, being careful because of Noah and our history. And I think that's been right. We needed that time to rebuild trust, to learn how to be partners in a different way than before." He took a deep breath, gathering courage for what came next. "But Sarah, I don't want to be careful anymore. I want to wake up with you and Noah every morning. I want us to be a real family, not just coordinated schedules and separate homes with overnight bags, but a true shared life." The directness of his words hung between them in the gathering twilight. Sarah didn't respond immediately, her thoughtful silence making Luke's heart race with uncertainty. Had he pushed too fast, assumed too much about where they were headed? Finally, she reached for his hand, her expression serious but not closed. "Luke," she began, "when you walked into the cafe that day, I was terrified, not just of how you would react to Noah, but of what it would mean to have you back in my life in any capacity. I'd spent so long convincing myself that our marriage ended because we wanted fundamentally different things, that you wanted career success above all else, that I was just an accessory to the life you were building. Luke started to protest, but she gently placed her fingers against his lips, asking silently for the chance to finish. These past months have shown me how wrong I was. Or maybe not wrong about who we were then, but about who you are now, who we can be together. Her voice softened, vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. I see how you look at Noah, with such love and wonder, and sometimes I catch you looking at me the same way, and it makes me believe in second chances, in a way I never thought possible. The honesty in her words, the raw emotion behind them, created a lump in Luke's throat that made it difficult to speak. Is that a yes? He finally managed, needing the clarity despite the emotional weight of the moment. Sarah laughed softly, the sound blending with the gentle evening breeze. Yes, Luke. It's a yes to building a life together, the three of us, as a family. But she hesitated, a shadow of their old conflicts briefly crossing her face. I need to know that this time will be different. That when challenges come, and they will, we'll face them together rather than retreating to our separate corners. That success for us won't be measured in promotions or profits, but in moments together in the family we create. Luke understood the fear behind her words, the legitimate concern based on how he had prioritized his life before. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes, he said honestly, but I can promise that you and Noah will always, always come first. The man who put work above everything else, he's gone, Sarah. The moment I held our son, that version of me ceased to exist. Emotional. The certainty in his voice seemed to reach something deep within her, because Sarah's eyes filled with tears even as she smiled, leaning forward to seal their new commitment with a kiss that tasted of wine and promise and second chances neither had believed possible. The following weekend, they took Noah to the beach, his first time seeing the ocean, a milestone they both wanted to share. They watched with matching expressions of wonder as their son approached the water with cautious fascination, first clinging to their hands, then gradually growing bolder, squealing with delight as small waves washed over his chubby feet. Mama! Dada, look, he called repeatedly, his vocabulary expanding daily, but his amazement at the vast expanse of water reducing him to simpler expressions. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, they built sandcastles together. Luke showing Noah how to pack wet sand into bucket shapes, Sarah decorating the structures with shells and bits of driftwood. It was during this simple activity, his hands covered in sand and his heart full of contentment, that Luke realized something profound. This, creating memories with the people he loved most in the world, was the true measure of success, the achievement that actually mattered. Later, as they walked back to the car, Noah drowsy between them, each holding one of his small hands as he occasionally lifted his feet to swing between them, Sarah glanced at Luke with an expression that mirrored his own feelings of fulfillment. Do you ever miss it? She asked quietly. The big deals, the adrenaline of corporate takeovers, being the youngest vice president in your firm's history? Luke considered the question seriously, wanting to give her an honest answer rather than just what she might want to hear. Sometimes, he admitted, there's a certain rush in closing a major deal, in solving business problems that seemed insurmountable. He looked down at Noah, whose eyes were growing heavy, small grains of sand still clinging to his dark hair, despite their best efforts to brush them away. But it doesn't compare to this. To teaching him to build sandcastles, to hearing him say new words, to coming home to both of you at the end of the day. The simple truth of it settled between them, comfortable and reassuring. Besides, he added with a smile, I'm still doing work I enjoy, just with better boundaries, more purpose. Sarah nodded, understanding what he meant. She had found the same balance with her freelance marketing work, which was gradually growing into a successful small business managed around Noah's schedule and needs. As summer bloomed into full glory, they made the practical arrangements for their shared life. Luke's house becoming their family home, with Sarah subletting her apartment to Nancy's niece, who was eager to help at the cafe. The process of combining their separate lives into one shared space was occasionally challenging, but ultimately joyful, a physical manifestation of the new family they were creating. Noah adapted with the resilience of childhood, delighted to have both parents under one roof, quickly establishing favorite spots in the house and yard. One evening, as they sat on the back porch watching Noah chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, Sarah turned to Luke with a thoughtful expression. "Do you realize what day it is?" she asked. Luke considered briefly before understanding dawned. 1 year, he said softly. 1 year since I walked into the cafe and saw you again. Sarah nodded, reaching for his hand. If someone had told me then, that day when I looked up and saw you standing there, when my heart nearly stopped with panic, that we'd be here now, like this, I would never have believed it possible. Luke lifted their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I would have, he said with surprising certainty. Not the details, maybe, but the feeling. Seeing you again after all that time. It felt like coming home, even through all the shock and confusion. Noah ran back to them then, breathless with excitement, a lightning bug temporarily captured between his cupped hands. Look, he commanded, carefully opening his fingers just enough to reveal the insect's gentle glow before it flew away into the darkening garden. His smile, so reminiscent of Luke's own, was filled with wonder at this small miracle of nature. Another one, he declared, racing off to continue his gentle hunt. Luke and Sarah watched him go, their shared gaze full of the silent communication parents develop, mutual adoration of their child, shared amusement at his enthusiasm, the deep contentment of witnessing his discoveries together. I've been thinking, Sarah said after a moment, her tone deliberately casual in a way that immediately caught Luke's attention. Noah's getting older. He'll be starting preschool in the fall. And the cafe is doing well. Nancy's talking about promoting me to partner next year. Luke nodded, sensing there was more to this seemingly ordinary update. And? He prompted gently. Sarah turned to face him directly, a mix of vulnerability and certainty in her expression. And I've been wondering if maybe it might be time to think about giving Noah a sibling. Not right away, but as something to consider. The suggestion caught Luke by surprise, not because he hadn't thought about it himself, but because Sarah had been the one to bring it up first. During their marriage, he had been the one pushing for advancement, for new chapters, for moving forward, while Sarah had often been the voice of caution, wanting to ensure they were truly ready for each new step. This role reversal, her suggesting they expand their family, felt significant, evidence of how much they had both changed and grown. I would love that, he said honestly, the image of another child, a brother or sister for Noah, another expression of their love, filling him with unexpected emotion. Whenever you're ready to try. Sarah's smile was radiant in the fading light, relief and happiness mingling in her expression. Not a baby right this minute, she clarified, ever the practical one. But maybe we could start discussing timelines, preparations, do things properly this time around, with both of us fully present from the beginning. The intentionality of the suggestion, so different from Noah's unplanned, though ultimately joyful arrival, felt right for who they were now, partners who communicated openly, who made important decisions together, who understood the weight and wonder of creating family. As darkness fully descended and Noah finally tired of his firefly chase, Luke scooped him up, his son's small head resting trustingly against his shoulder as they headed inside. Sarah walked beside them, her hand resting lightly on Luke's back, the three of them moving as a unit in the comfortable rhythm they had developed over the past year. Later, after Noah was settled in his dinosaur-themed bedroom, Luke found Sarah, standing in the doorway to what was currently their home office, a thoughtful expression on her face. "This would make a good nursery," she observed quietly, leaning back against him when he slipped his arms around her waist. "South-facing for morning light, close to our room, but not too close to Noah's. He's going to be a protective big brother, I think, but he'll still need his space." The casual certainty with which she envisioned their future together, not just the practical logistics of another child, but the emotional landscape of their growing family, filled Luke with profound gratitude for this second chance neither of them had expected. "Do you ever wonder," he asked softly, "what would have happened if I hadn't walked into the cafe that day, if my regular coffee shop hadn't been closed for renovations?" Sarah turned in his arms, her expression serious as she considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I look at how happy Noah is having both of us in his life. How right this feels despite all the complications and history. And I think maybe it wasn't just chance. Maybe we were always meant to find our way back to each other. We just needed to become the right versions of ourselves first." The sentiment wasn't something the old Luke would have entertained. Too mystical, too unquantifiable for his former preference for concrete facts and strategic planning. But the man he had become over this transformative year, the father and partner who had learned to value connection above achievement, found himself nodding in agreement. "The long way around," he murmured, tucking a strand of hair behind her, ear in a gesture of familiar tenderness. "But we got here eventually." Sarah smiled, rising on tiptoes to kiss him softly. "And this time," she promised against his lips, "we're staying." In the nursery that would eventually become reality, in the home they were creating together, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life, Noah's toys scattered across the living room floor, Sarah's books mingling with Luke's on the shelves, photographs documenting their journey from separated co-parents to reunited family. They held each other, both silently acknowledging how close they had come to missing this chance. One closed coffee shop, one coincidental timing, one moment of recognition across a crowded cafe. The fragile threads of circumstance that had rewoven their lives together, creating something stronger and more beautiful than either could have imagined that autumn morning when a man walked into a cafe and saw his ex-wife and the son he never knew he had. What was your favorite part of this heartwarming story? Was it the moment Luke first saw his son, or perhaps when they finally decided to give their relationship another chance? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this emotional journey, please subscribe to our channel for more stories that touch the heart and celebrate the power of second chances. Your support helps us continue bringing these meaningful narratives to life. Until next time.